A tech mix-up turned a CEO into a smitten suitor. Here's how it all began. Hey everyone, drop a like and let us know in the comments which city you're tuning in from. We'd love to hear from you. Enjoy the story. Emma Carter didn't have time to panic. It was her first day as an executive assistant, and fate was already working against her. The system at Grayson Enterprises was down. Employees were running around like crazy. "The server's down," someone yelled. "Nothing works. We've lost all the files." I didn't back up the reports. Emma rubbed her temples. Great. First morning, and it already felt like she was in charge of the Titanic. She grabbed the phone and dialed IT support. Busy line. Tried again. Nothing. Wonderful. "We're stuck in a digital apocalypse," she grumbled, slamming the phone onto the desk. And it was right at that moment that a tall, well-dressed man walked into the office. Impeccable suit, polished shoes, serious expression. He looked calm, watching the chaos around him with his arms crossed, as if this were just a normal Tuesday. Emma didn't waste time. "Finally! You took way too long." She marched up to him, no beating around the bush. "The system is down, and it's a mess. Fix this now." The man raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "Excuse me?" Emma stomped her foot. "Excuse me nothing. I said fix it." She emphasized each word. "Before this company burns down and I get fired before I even find out where the bathroom is." He let out a small laugh, looking more entertained than worried. "What if I told you I can't fix it?" Emma sighed loudly. "Oh, great. First day. And they send me a clueless tech guy. Look, I've already wasted 5 minutes of my life with you. If you don't want to work, at least pretend to care." The man seemed to enjoy this even more. "So, is that what I'm supposed to do? Pretend to care?" "Yes. And work on that computer like you're solving the cure for the century. Got it?" He shook his head with an ironic look. "All right, here we go." Emma shoved him into the chair, as gently as she would shove a refrigerator. "Hurry up." The man adjusted his suit, sighed theatrically, and started typing something on the keyboard. Emma leaned over to the side, watching his every move. "Wow, so slow. Are you typing with just one finger?" "You need to be patient. You need to be fast. This isn't an IT course for seniors." The man stopped typing and looked at her. "Am I really being asked to work faster by you?" "Yes." "What do you think this is, brain surgery? It's just a computer. Click, fix it, and let's move on." He sighed again, pretending to suffer, and went back to working on the machine. 5 minutes later, "Well, finished. Almost." "Almost. My grandfather could have fixed this before taking his nap." He looked away from the computer and stared at her, clearly enjoying himself. "Was your grandfather in IT?" "No, but even he would know you're stalling." The man actually laughed this time. Impatient, Emma grabbed the phone again. "Hello, security? The IT guy needs to be escorted out because he can't fix a basic system." The man raised his hands in surrender. Okay, calm down. Look, watch this." He pressed a single key, and suddenly, all the screens went back to normal. The entire office breathed a sigh of relief. "Hallelujah!" Emma clapped her hands. "Finally! That wasn't so hard, was it?" He stood up slowly, adjusting his wristwatch. "That was interesting." Emma sighed in relief. "Great. Now you can go up to the next floor and fix their system." The man raised an eyebrow, and his smile grew. "And who said I work here?" Emma froze. The sentence hung in the air for a few seconds, but her brain took a moment to process it. It was at that exact moment that a man in a gray suit entered the room, hurried and a bit sweaty. "Sir, everyone's waiting for you in the board meeting." Emma blinked. "Sir? Board meeting?" The information exploded in her mind like fireworks. She froze, her eyes wide as if she'd been shocked. The man in front of her wasn't the IT guy. He was James Grayson, the new CEO of the company. The silence in the office was deafening. Everyone in the room realized the disaster before Emma did. James slowly turned to her, crossed his arms, and tilted his head slightly, a sly smile on his face. Emma felt her spine freeze. "So, Miss Carter, any more orders for me? Or are you satisfied now?" Emma felt the world crumble. Her face turned as red as a tomato. Her hands started sweating, and her mind screamed, "I'm fired!" in flashing neon. James chuckled quietly, clearly enjoying himself. Emma, on the other hand, wanted to dig a hole and disappear. The silence in the room was deafening. Emma could feel the sweat running down her neck. Her heart was pounding so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. She blinked, hoping by some miracle reality would disintegrate, and she would wake up safe in her bed, far away from this nightmare. But no, there was James Grayson, the CEO of the company, standing right in front of her. And she had just treated him like an incompetent technician, yelled at him, and practically dragged him to fix a computer. She was in big, big trouble. James was still looking at her with amusement in his eyes, arms crossed as if he were savoring the moment. "Miss Carter, you look surprised." Emma swallowed hard. I... Her brain seemed to have frozen, just like the computers earlier. The employees around her didn't dare to breathe loudly. Some tried to hide behind their screens, while others exchanged glances, almost saying, "She's done for." It was nice knowing her. James's assistant, still waiting by his side, seemed a little uncomfortable, maybe because he had just witnessed one of the worst corporate blunders in history. James, on the other hand, seemed genuinely entertained. He tilted his head slightly. "You know, I've never received such a direct order in my entire career." "Bossy, huh?" Emma opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her whole body screamed for her to do something, anything, to get out of this mess. But the best she could manage was a nervous, completely inappropriate laugh. "Ha ha 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 ah!" Great. Now, on top of being humiliated, she looked like a crazy person laughing to herself. James raised an eyebrow. Was that an attempt at a laugh, or a short circuit? Both. He gave a half smile. Interesting. Emma felt her stomach churn. She needed to get out of there, or disappear into thin air, or be swallowed by the floor. Anything would be better than staying at James Grayson's sharp gaze. She tried to gather herself, even though her legs felt like jelly. "Look, Mr. Grayson, I honestly didn't know who you were." James let out a fake sigh of regret. "And to think I spent 5 minutes being treated like an incompetent intern. My ego will never be the same." The room filled with muffled coughs and sniffles, clearly the employees trying not to laugh. Emma felt her face get even hotter. "I'm so sorry. It was an honest mistake. How was I supposed to know?" James took a step forward, his intense gaze making Emma want to run away. "And do you yell at all the new hires around here? Or was I a special case?" I was just trying to fix the problem," Emma tried to explain desperately. James pretended to think for a moment. "It was efficient, I'll give you that. Rude, but efficient." Emma opened her mouth to defend herself, but was interrupted by a loud cough. James's assistant glanced at his watch, nervous. "Sir, the directors are waiting in the meeting room." James nodded calmly, but kept his eyes on Emma. "Ah, yes, the meeting." Emma tried to calm herself. Maybe he was in a hurry and would forget about her. Maybe this was just a nightmare, and she'd wake up soon. But then James smiled slowly and calculatingly. "Miss Carter, you're going to come with me." Emma froze. "What?" "I said you're coming with me." He looked around. "Since you like giving orders so much, I want you to personally explain to the directors what happened with the system." The whole office held its breath. Emma felt her knees weaken. She was about to walk into a high-level meeting next to the CEO of the company to explain the mistake of the day. Suddenly, selling coconut water on the beach seemed like a tempting option. Emma followed James through the hallways, feeling the employees' stares boring into her back. "Sir, I really don't think it's necessary for me to go to this meeting." James didn't stop walking. "But I think it is." Emma bit her lip to stop herself from letting out a desperate sigh. They entered the elevator, and for a moment, there was an awkward silence, until James turned his face slightly toward her. "Oh, just so you know, you're the first person to drag me into fixing a computer." Emma covered her face with her hands. "Please stop reminding me of that." James laughed. "Not that I would want to." The meeting room was huge, filled with directors in suits. When James entered, everyone immediately stood up. Emma felt her spine stiffen. James walked to the center of the room, calm, as if nothing had happened. "Gentlemen, before we begin, our new assistant, Miss Carter, would like to share how she solved the system issue this morning." 20 pairs of eyes pierced through her at once. Emma swallowed hard. She thought of 1,000 ways to get out of this situation. Make up an excuse, run away, pretend she was crazy. But there was no way out. So, she took a deep breath and blurted out, all at once, "Well, I gave the wrong order." There was a deadly silence. James just raised an eyebrow. Emma squeezed her eyes shut tightly. "Actually, I mistook the CEO of the company for an IT technician and made him fix the computer." There was a dry sound. Emma opened her eyes and saw one of the directors dropping his pen out of pure shock. James, on the other hand, was just smiling. And efficiently, I must say. Emma shrank in her chair. One of the directors cleared his throat and tried to hide his laugh. James turned to Emma, clearly savoring the moment. "I must say, Miss Carter, you know how to make an entrance at a company." Emma felt her soul leave her body. What was next? A firing? A month of jokes? James crossed his arms, thoughtful. "I wonder if I should reconsider your position. Maybe I should transfer you to IT support, since you have so much experience with orders there." The directors couldn't hold back their laughter anymore. Emma wanted to disappear, but next to her, James Grayson seemed more interested than ever, and that was terrifying. Hey, readers, what do you think of Emma's bold move? Smash that like button and drop your thoughts below. We're dying to know what you'd do in her shoes. Emma felt James's gaze fixed on her, while the meeting room still echoed with the muffled laughter of the directors. She wanted to vanish, evaporate, run to the mountains and raise goats. Anything would be better than staying there. But no, she was stuck in that chair, staring at the CEO she had mistaken for a technician and ordered to fix a computer. James still seemed to be enjoying the whole thing. He turned to the directors and clapped his hands together, wrapping up the moment casually. "All right, now that everyone's had their morning dose of entertainment, let's get back to work." The directors quickly composed themselves, adjusting their ties and trying to regain their seriousness. Emma hid behind her notebook, hoping no one would bring up the disaster again. But of course, James Grayson wasn't going to let her off that easily. He looked directly at her, crossed his arms and said, "Oh, and Miss Carter, after the meeting, come to my office. We need to talk." That was it. It was over. Emma felt her soul leave her body. She was going to be fired. She knew it. After all the effort she'd put into getting this job, she'd managed to throw it away in less than a morning. Congratulations to her. Emma spent the entire meeting not paying attention to anything: the charts, the financial reports, the company's growth projections. Everything was a blur in her mind. She just stared at the clock, watching the time tick by until her inevitable reckoning. With every minute that passed, her anxiety only grew. She started imagining all the possible scenarios. James would yell at her and fire her on the spot. He'd ask HR to prepare her termination letter and escort her out of the building. He'd stay silent and just point to the door, a real, final blow to her dignity. Each option seemed worse than the last. And the worst part? James didn't seem in any hurry to end her suffering. In fact, he was completely calm, as if he'd forgotten she even existed, which made everything even more terrifying. When the meeting finally ended, Emma stayed behind, waiting for everyone to leave the room. Her heart was in her throat. James stood up calmly, grabbed his documents, and glanced at her. "Let's go, Carter." Emma closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "May the employment gods have mercy on me." And she followed James to his office. James Grayson's office was something out of a luxury catalog. Dark wooden furniture, shelves full of impeccably organized books, a panoramic view of the city, and in the center, him. James Anybody sat in the chair like a king on his throne, rested his elbows on the desk, and gestured for Emma to sit in the chair across from him. She slowly obeyed, feeling like a child called to the principal's office. For a few seconds, he just stared at her in silence. Emma tried to smile. "So, Mr. Grayson, you wanted to talk to me?" James raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Grayson? Funny. Earlier, I was just the IT guy, and the guy who needs to work faster." Emma felt her face turn red. Honest mistake." James let out a low laugh. "Sure, and it was fun, I'll admit." Emma blinked, surprised. "Fun? Yeah, it's not every day someone gives me orders in my own company." Emma sighed with relief. Maybe he wasn't that angry after all. But then James leaned slightly forward and smiled. However, the relief disappeared immediately. "We need to talk about your future here." Emma swallowed hard. My future?" James nodded. "Yes. Your attitude today showed me something interesting." Emma held her breath. "Am I impulsive?" "You're stubborn, bossy, and have no filter." "Great." James laughed. "And you're quick, determined, and not easily intimidated." Emma's eyes went wide. "Is that a compliment?" "A statement." She wasn't sure if she should feel flattered or offended. James interlaced his fingers and watched her with interest. "I need someone like that by my side." Emma almost fell off her chair. "Sorry, what?" James smiled slightly. "I'm promoting you." Emma froze. Time seemed to stop. "You want to promote me?" "Yes." "Why?" James shrugged. "Because you entertain me." Emma was stunned. "That's your reason?" "And also because I think you have potential." She eyed him suspiciously. "So, you want to keep me around just to laugh at me?" James didn't confirm, but didn't deny it either. Emma narrowed her eyes. "So, what kind of promotion is this?" James smiled. "Starting today, you'll be my personal assistant." Emma swallowed hard. "Personal? As in, directly to you?" "Exactly." Emma felt her hands sweat. She already had enough trouble being the assistant to the directors. Now she'd have to deal with James Grayson directly. She tried to find a way out. What if I say no?" James raised an eyebrow. "You want to say no?" Emma bit her lip. "Is that a serious question or a trick to intimidate me?" James smiled. "Both." Emma took a deep breath. What could she do? If she refused, she might lose her job. If she accepted, well, she'd have to deal with a sarcastic, unpredictable boss every day. And for some bizarre reason, the idea didn't sound so bad. She looked at James and made her decision. "All right, I accept." James smiled with satisfaction. "Great." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. She was absolutely sure that this decision was going to change her life. She just didn't know if it would be for better or for worse. Emma left James's office with weak legs. She wasn't sure if she had just received a promotion or a death sentence. Her brain was still trying to process what had just happened. In less than a day, she had yelled at the company's CEO, confused him with an IT guy, ordered him to work faster, and somehow, absurdly, this led to a new role directly by his side. Let's have a little fun with those who only read the comments. Type Starbucks in the comments. Only those who got this far will understand. Now, let's continue the story. Her heart was still racing as she walked down the hallway. What exactly does a personal assistant to the CEO do? Get coffee? Organize his schedule? Or worse, stand by his side all the time, dealing with his orders and sarcastic personality. She walked into the administrative office like she was carrying a state secret. All eyes were on her the moment she stepped in. People whispered in the corners. Some laughed quietly. Others stared at her, like she was a ghost of a former employee who had died for saying something wrong to James Grayson. "I heard you survived," said one of the employees, pulling the chair next to hers. "Tell me, how was your execution?" Emma slumped into the chair, dropped her shoulders, and let out a defeated sigh. "He didn't fire me." The entire office went silent for a moment. Then a wave of whispers and murmurs spread. "What?" A woman's eyes widened. "But everyone saw what happened in the meeting room." "Not only was I not fired," Emma sighed, "I was promoted." The commotion was immediate. Stifled screams, people holding onto their desks. A man even dropped his coffee mug. One of the older employees approached, looking at Emma like she was some kind of scientific anomaly. "Mr. Grayson promoted you straight to his personal assistant?" This time, the commotion was replaced by a terrified silence. Emma frowned. "Okay, what's the problem?" A woman with her hair tied in a tight bun and a serious posture looked at Emma like she was about to face a minefield. "You've just been thrown into the lion's den." A guy who seemed a bit younger leaned forward. "Mr. Grayson never had a personal assistant." Emma blinked. "What? He has assistants, of course." The woman continued. "But personal assistants? Number he fires them all before even considering the possibility." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. "So, why me?" No one knew the answer, but one thing was certain. She was in trouble. Before she could process this new information, the phone on the desk beside her rang. The receptionist answered, stayed silent for a moment, and then looked directly at Emma. "Miss Carter?" Emma swallowed hard. "Yes?" "Mr. Grayson is calling you to his office." The entire office held its breath. "Good luck," someone murmured in the back. Emma wanted to scream. She slowly got up, like she was marching to the slaughter, and walked toward the CEO's office. Each step felt like it weighed a ton. When she reached the door, she took a deep breath 3 times, ran her hands through her hair to look somewhat presentable, and knocked. "Come in," the deep voice echoed from inside. She turned the doorknob, opened the door, and found James Grayson sitting behind his desk, going through some papers. He didn't even look up when she walked in. Emma stepped closer, feeling more nervous with every passing second. "You called for me?" James finally lifted his gaze. Emma felt a chill run down her spine. He had that analytical, intense look that seemed to read her every thought without saying a single word. "Yes, sit down." Emma settled into the chair and tried not to look too tense. James twirled a pen between his fingers, like he was considering something. "You start officially today as my personal assistant." She forced a smile. "Good, because I was worried I wouldn't have anything to do." James raised an eyebrow. "Sarcasm on the first day? Brave." Emma straightened up in her chair. "Sorry, it's just the shock." James set the pen down on the desk and leaned slightly forward. "You'll have direct access to my schedule, my meetings, my trips, and anything else I need you to take care of for me. Your job is to make sure I don't waste time on unnecessary things." Emma blinked. "So, basically, I need to make sure you never get upset about anything?" "Exactly." She took a deep breath. "Sounds difficult." James smiled. "It will be." Emma felt like crying, but then James pulled out a black folder and slid it across the desk to her. "Your first challenge." She picked up the folder and opened it, looking over the papers inside. "What's this?" "A charity dinner. I'm one of the speakers. You need to organize everything." Emma flipped through the papers, seeing the guest list, the location, the schedule details. "This is in 3 days." "Yes, And you're giving this to me now? Yes. Emma felt a wave of panic. Mr. Grayson, James raised a hand to stop her. Challenges are part of the job. If you can handle this without me having to worry about it, then I'll know I made the right choice. Emma closed her eyes for a second, trying not to freak out. She had to plan a high-class event in 3 days without missing a single detail. Great. She stood up, holding the folder like it was a cement brick. Okay, I'll take care of it. James smiled slightly, satisfied. Great. Emma turned to leave, but before she reached the door, she heard his voice again. Oh, and Emma? She slowly turned around. Yes. James rested his chin on his hands, smiling that usual enigmatic smile. You're more interesting than I expected. Emma felt a strange shiver run down her spine, but she didn't wait to figure out what he meant. She simply left the room as quickly as possible, because she already had enough problems to deal with. Emma spent the next few hours running around the office, calling suppliers, confirming RSVPs, organizing speeches, and trying to figure out how the heck she had ended up in this situation. She only knew one thing. Surviving her first day as James Grayson's assistant was a victory. Now she had to survive the rest of the week. Emma left James's office holding the black folder like it was a bomb ready to explode. A high-profile charity dinner in 3 days. No experience, no room for mistakes. Of course, nothing in her life could ever be simple. She walked down the hallway, feeling the eyes of her colleagues on her. Everyone was curious about how she was still employed. Some were even whispering, trying to guess what had happened in the CEO's office. Emma didn't have time for gossip. She needed to figure out how to organize an event of this scale without causing a disaster. When she got to her desk, she opened the folder and started reviewing the documents. A guest list with the names of powerful business people, influential politicians and celebrities. The venue, a luxurious hotel in the city center. The menu needed to be chosen, the decorations adjusted, the speeches reviewed. She felt a tightness in her chest. "What's going on now?" a familiar voice asked from beside her. Emma looked up at the woman with the tight bun, the same one who had warned her that working with James was like stepping into a lion's den. "He gave me 3 days to organize a high-profile charity dinner," she replied, exasperated. The woman's eyes widened. "Ah, so he's already started the testing phase." Emma frowned. "What does that mean?" "Mr. Grayson likes to test people. He throws impossible challenges to see how far they can go before they break." Emma blinked. "So, he's literally waiting for me to fail?" The woman shrugged. "Or for you to surprise him. It depends on how you handle it." Emma slammed the folder shut with a snap. "Great. Now I have even more pressure." She glanced at the clock. If she stayed there feeling sorry for herself, she wouldn't even have time to make a mistake. She decided her first step was to figure out what was already in place and what needed to be done. She picked up the phone and started calling suppliers, trying to negotiate services, check contracts, and make sure everything was on track. The first call was to the company handling the decorations. After 4 failed attempts, someone finally answered. "Hello? Hi, this is Emma Carter, Mr. James Grayson's personal assistant. I'm reaching out to confirm the details for the charity dinner decorations." "Oh, sure. We have a bit of a problem." Emma felt a chill. "What kind of problem?" "Well, the venue didn't approve the installation of the setup we planned. We need to redo the concept." Emma narrowed her eyes. "And when were you planning on letting me know about this?" "Technically now." Emma closed her eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. "Okay, so can you redo it and send me the new proposal today?" Actually, it would take at least a week." Emma almost threw the phone out the window. "Are you telling me that 3 days before the event, I have no decorations?" The silence on the other end was the confirmation she needed. "Okay, I'll handle it." She hung up and massaged her temples. "Breathe, Emma. You got this. She picked up the phone again and started calling other suppliers. All of them were either fully booked or charging an outrageous price. After half an hour, she managed to find a company willing to take on the job in record time. It would be expensive, but better than nothing. Meanwhile, other problems began popping up. The menu still wasn't settled. James's speech wasn't ready. The invitations were late. The band canceled. With each new problem, Emma felt like she was getting closer to a nervous breakdown. In the middle of the afternoon, she went to James's office to update him on the challenges. When she walked in, he was going through reports, like everything was in perfect order. "Mr. Grayson?" James looked up. "And what do you have for me?" Emma pulled out a notebook. "The decorator quit. The band canceled. The menu isn't approved. The invitations still haven't been sent. And oh, I haven't slept since I started dealing with this." James rested his chin in his hands, a small smile at the corner of his lips. "So, basically, it's all a disaster." Emma let out a dramatic sigh. "Basically." James was silent for a moment, just watching her. Emma started feeling uncomfortable. Was he waiting for her to lose it? To quit? But to her surprise, he picked up the phone and made a call. "George, I want the dinner invitations on my desk by the end of the day. No excuses." He hung up and looked at Emma. "The rest, you can handle." Emma blinked. "That's it? Were you expecting a motivational speech?" "I was hoping for at least a good luck." James tilted his head slightly. "You don't need luck. You need coffee." Emma opened her mouth, then closed it. "Okay, that's the first thing you've said today that actually makes sense." James chuckled softly. "You're doing better than I thought." Emma felt a small flicker of pride. "So, you don't think I'm going to fail miserably?" "Not yet." "Wow, what an inspiring vote of confidence." James just smiled, clearly enjoying himself. Emma sighed and left the room, ready to continue the battle. In the next 2 days, she worked non-stop, running back and forth, fixing the final details, making sure every piece was in the right place. On the last day, she finally managed to finalize the menu, replace the band, and approve the alternative decorations. When the time for the event finally came, Emma barely had a chance to catch her breath before slipping into an elegant dress and rushing to the venue to make sure everything was in order. She checked every detail as if her life depended on it. In the middle of the crowd, she saw James arrive. He looked flawless, as always, but his eyes were searching for something. When he spotted her, he raised a glass of champagne and gave her an enigmatic look. Emma walked over to him, expecting some sarcastic comment. "So, is everything in order?" he asked. "Yes. Against all odds, everything is perfect." James gave a small smile. "I had no doubts." Emma raised an eyebrow. "Really? If you had failed, I would have already gotten angry calls." Emma let out a relieved laugh. "Does this mean I passed your test?" James leaned in slightly. "Let's see if you survive the next one." Emma shivered. She was sure her life would never be dull next to James Grayson. How would you handle Emma's chaos? Hit that like button and share your survival tips in the comments. We want to hear your strategies. Emma had barely had time to breathe ever since she took on the impossible task of organizing the charity dinner in just 3 days. Her life had turned into a whirlwind of phone calls, last-minute confirmations, and unexpected crises. She barely slept, surviving on coffee, and her sanity was hanging by a thread. But now, on the day of the event, everything was ready. The hotel ballroom was flawless, decorated with sophisticated luxury. The tables were elegantly set, the lighting was perfect, and even the napkins had been folded identically, down to the last detail. Emma walked through the room, checking every detail. The chef made sure dinner would be served on time, the new band was getting ready, and guests were starting to arrive. She felt a small sense of relief, but didn't allow herself to celebrate yet. Not until everything was over without a disaster. She wore an elegant black dress, fitting for the occasion, but her shoes were already killing her feet from walking back and forth. She grabbed the tablet to review the guest list when she heard a deep, unmistakable voice behind her. "Well, you've made it this far." Emma turned around and found James Grayson standing there, observing the room with his analytical gaze. He wore a perfectly tailored tuxedo, so perfectly fitted, it seemed like he was born in it. His hair was meticulously styled, and he held a glass of champagne, as if he had all the time in the world. Emma crossed her arms. "It's not over yet. There's still time for something to blow up." James raised an eyebrow. "An optimistic view." "Realistic," Emma corrected. James took a sip of his drink and tilted his head slightly, studying her with that look that always made her feel uncomfortable. "You look tired." Emma let out a short laugh. "Is that a compliment?" "Just an observation." "I'll take it as a recognition of my effort." James gave a small smile. "If that makes you happy." Emma sighed and went back to checking her task list, but before she could finish, she was interrupted by a hurried waiter. "Miss Carter, we have a problem in the kitchen." Emma felt her heart race. "What now?" "The head chef is freaking out. He said he got a last-minute request to change the main dish and is threatening to cancel everything." Emma closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "Give me 2 minutes." She looked at James, who just smiled. "Good luck." Emma hurried out and entered the hotel kitchen, where she found the chef gesturing frantically, surrounded by confused assistants. "I spent 3 days planning this menu, and now someone wants me to change everything? No, no, this is outrageous." Emma raised her hands, trying to calm things down. "Okay, let's fix this. Who made the request?" One of the assistants stepped forward hesitantly. "It was one of the VIP guests. He's allergic to the main dish." Emma felt a weight lift off her shoulders. "So, why don't we just prepare an alternative for him?" The chef's eyes widened. "Alternative? I don't have extra ingredients." Emma looked around, spotted a tray of salmon, and pointed. "What's that?" "Smoked salmon for the appetizers." "Perfect. We'll make a special for him with salmon. The rest of the menu stays the same." The chef crossed his arms, considering the idea. That could work." Emma forced a smile. "Great. So let's stop freaking out and make this happen." The chef huffed, but started giving orders to the assistants. Emma left the kitchen, feeling exhausted but satisfied to have solved another problem before it turned into a disaster. She returned to the ballroom and found James exactly where she left him, watching the scene as if it were a private show. "Did you save the dinner?" Emma sighed. "The chef wanted to blow everything up, but I convinced him to stick to the plan." James laughed. "I'd say you've got a talent for handling crises." "I'd say I'm too young to have an ulcer, but here we are." James raised his glass to her. "To your first big event." Emma hesitated, but took a champagne glass from a passing waiter and toasted with him. "May it not be the last." James took a sip, then looked straight at her. "That depends on you." Emma felt a slight shiver at his tone, but before she could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of an important guest. She spent the rest of the night making sure everything went according to plan. She watched James's speech, dealt with small surprises, and tried to ignore the strange feeling that somehow he was always watching her. When the event finally ended, guests began to leave, and Emma felt like she could finally breathe. She took off her shoes under the table and threw herself into a chair in the corner of the empty room. Her feet ached, her head throbbed, but she had made it. James walked over, hands in his pockets, looking at her with a playful gleam in his eyes. "So, how do you feel?" Emma sighed. "Like I ran a marathon in high heels." James smiled. "You did a good job." Emma's eyes widened. "Was that a compliment?" "It was a fact." Emma rolled her eyes. "You're incapable of giving a direct compliment, huh?" James just smiled. The important thing is that you understood. She shook her head, too tired to argue. Right. And now? James took out his phone, typed something quickly, then put it back in his pocket. Now, you rest. But tomorrow at 8 o'clock in the morning, I want you in my office. We have a new agenda to discuss. Emma groaned. Tomorrow? Don't you ever rest? No. She sighed, grabbed her shoes, and struggled to get up. All right, I'm going home before you give me another impossible task. James watched her for a moment before responding. Good night, Emma. She blinked. It was the first time he called her by her first name. Emma wasn't sure what to think about that, so she just gave a nod and left. When she got into the taxi, she looked in the rearview mirror and saw James still standing at the hotel entrance, watching her with that enigmatic expression she still couldn't figure out. She didn't know what James Grayson really wanted, but she knew one thing. Working with him would be anything but boring. Now, all she wanted was a bed, a pillow, and to forget that her life had been turned upside down since meeting that man. But something told her that this was just the first of many chaotic nights with him. Emma woke up to the alarm ringing for the third time. Her body protested the idea of getting up, but the memory of James's words echoed in her mind. Tomorrow, at 8 in the morning, I want you in my office. She groaned, rolled over in bed, feeling every muscle in her body ache after the madness of organizing that charity dinner. All she wanted was a few more hours of sleep, but if she had learned anything about James Grayson, it was that he wasn't the type to accept excuses. She forced herself out of bed and dragged herself to the bathroom, splashing cold water on her face and quickly tying her hair into a bun. She chose a dark blazer and dress pants, trying to look professional enough to avoid giving James any more reason to question her confidence. She grabbed a quick coffee and rushed to the office. When she walked into the building, she noticed that several people were watching her. It had been a few days since she'd become the center of office gossip, but now it seemed even worse. As soon as she got to her desk, she found a pile of documents waiting for her. She sighed and started organizing everything when her phone rang. Emma Carter, you're late. Emma almost dropped the phone. She quickly glanced at the clock. It was 8:03. I'm 3 minutes late. That doesn't count, she replied indignantly. If you were in an important meeting and showed up 3 minutes late, would you still be considered on time? Emma sighed. I'm on my way. She rushed up and walked to James's office. When she entered, he was sitting at his desk, flipping through some papers. His eyes lifted to her as soon as she closed the door. Good morning, Mr. Grayson. Depends on how this morning goes. Emma sat down across from him, crossing her legs, waiting for him to say something other than intimidating phrases. James grabbed a black folder and slid it across the desk to her. This is your new task. Emma opened the folder and found a series of internal documents, contracts, and a tight schedule of meetings. And what exactly do you need me to do with this? You're now part of my strategic team. I need you to organize and review these contracts, making sure everything aligns with our guidelines before the investor meeting on Friday. She blinked. Wait, does this mean I'll be attending that meeting? James gave a half smile. You've already proven you can handle pressure. I want to see how you do in the real business world. Emma felt a chill. I'm not sure if I should feel honored or terrified. Both are fitting feelings. She closed the folder and took a deep breath. All right, I'll take care of it. James leaned forward, elbows on the table, interlacing his fingers. Aren't you going to ask why I'm giving you this responsibility? Emma looked him in the eye. I don't need to. You want to see how far I can go before I break. James chuckled softly. Smart. Emma stood up, grabbing the documents. Smart would have been turning down this job. But you didn't turn it down. Not yet. James watched her as she walked out of the room. You won't turn it down. She rolled her eyes and closed the door behind her. In the following hours, She dove into the contracts. They were long, filled with technical terms and complex clauses. Her head throbbed, but she wasn't going to give up. If James wanted to test her, then she would show him she was up for the challenge. Before she knew it, it was almost 7 in the evening. The office was beginning to empty, but she still had a lot to review. Her stomach growled loudly, reminding her she hadn't eaten anything since breakfast. She stood up, stretched her body, and grabbed her purse. She was about to leave when she heard James's voice behind her. "Do you usually work this late?" Emma turned around and saw James standing in the doorway of his office, watching her with curiosity. "I needed to finish this." "You could have done it tomorrow." "I could have, but I'd rather finish it now." James walked over, looking at the documents on her desk. "Did you find any inconsistencies in the contracts?" "A few small details that could be used against the company in case of a lawsuit. I made some notes." James picked up one of the pages and reviewed the marks she had made. "Impressive." Emma smiled. "Was that a compliment?" "Don't get used to it." She laughed. "Why are you still here? Don't you have a fancy mansion to go back to?" James stared at her for a moment, then shrugged. "Maybe I just like seeing how far you can go." Emma scoffed. "If that's the goal, you'll need patience." James gave a half smile. "We'll see." He turned to leave, but before exiting, he stopped at the door. "Are you hungry?" Emma furrowed her brow. "What?" "I asked if you're hungry." She hesitated. "Yes." "Why?" James glanced at the clock. "I'm going to dinner. You can come and tell me more about those inconsistencies in the contracts." Emma stared at him, trying to figure out if he was serious or just having fun at her expense. "Is this a test?" "If you want to consider it that way." Emma sighed. "Whatever, as long as food's involved." James gave a small smile and nodded. "Let's go." Emma grabbed her things and followed him out of the office. She still wasn't sure where this partnership was going, but one thing was clear. Working with James Grayson was like a power game, and she had to make sure she wasn't the first to lose. What's your take on James's dinner invite? Give us a like and tell us in the comments if you think it's a test or something more. Emma followed James down to the building's underground garage, where he unlocked a black sports car with a simple click. The vehicle looked like it came straight out of a luxury catalog, and Emma swallowed hard. She realized she'd never been so close to a car worth that much. She hesitated before getting into the passenger seat, taking in the smell of leather and advanced technology around her. James slid in next to her with his usual calm and started the engine, which purred like a wild animal. "I hope you don't drive like a maniac," Emma said, fastening her seatbelt as if her life depended on it. James gave her an amused look before smoothly accelerating. "I drive better than you read contracts." Emma rolled her eyes, but didn't reply. In the first few minutes of the drive, the silence between them felt comfortable. The city passed by, the lights from the buildings reflecting in the glass, and for the first time that day, Emma felt like she could breathe. The car stopped in front of a fancy restaurant downtown. Emma looked out the window, trying to hide her shock as she realized that place was way beyond what she could afford in a whole month's salary. Large glass doors reflected the sophisticated lighting inside, and customers dressed in impeccable clothes passed through the entrance, where a valet in a stylish uniform was already waiting to take James's car keys. She turned to him, suspicious. "This is the kind of place where a salad costs more than my rent, isn't it?" James gave a small smile, clearly enjoying himself. "Is that a problem?" Emma scoffed, unbuckling her seatbelt. "For me, yes. For you, clearly not." James got out of the car without responding and handed the keys to the valet, who smiled and gave a slight bow before getting into the vehicle. Emma got out from the other side, adjusting her blazer and feeling completely out of place in a place where even the air seemed expensive. Once inside, they were immediately greeted by the maitre d', a well-dressed gentleman who, upon seeing James, smiled politely. "Mr. Grayson, it's a pleasure to welcome you back. Your table is ready." Emma raised an eyebrow, watching the scene. "Do you have a reserved table here? Like it's your second home?" James simply followed the maitre d' without answering. Emma rolled her eyes and followed him to a reserved table in a corner of the restaurant, away from the curious gazes of the other guests. As soon as they sat down, a waiter immediately appeared with a bottle of wine. "Your usual wine, Mr. Grayson?" Emma crossed her arms, watching as the waiter poured the glasses. "Impressive. You're treated like royalty here." James picked up the glass and swirled the liquid slowly before taking a sip. "I'm treated like royalty everywhere." Emma let out a short, sarcastic laugh. "You really have an indestructible ego, don't you?" James just smiled. "It's not ego, it's reality." Emma shook her head and grabbed the menu. As soon as she opened it, she felt a slight panic seeing the prices. "Oh, of course. A simple steak costs half my salary." "How wonderful!" James leaned slightly over the table, watching her with an amused look. "Choose whatever you want." Emma furrowed her brow, suspicious. "Are you paying?" "I brought you here, didn't I?" "Yes, but you've also thrown me into impossible challenges before, so I'm not sure I trust your sudden kindness." James chuckled softly and took another sip of wine. "I just want to hear more about the inconsistencies in the contracts." Emma let out a dramatic sigh and closed the menu. "Fine, but I warn you, if you're rude, I'll order the most expensive thing on the menu." James raised an eyebrow. "Is this how you always negotiate?" "Always." The waiter returned, and Emma ordered a pasta dish, resisting the temptation to choose something outrageously expensive, just to tease James. He, on the other hand, ordered a steak without even looking at the menu. After the waiter left, Emma pulled out one of the contracts she had brought in her bag and spread it out on the table. "All right, let's get to the point. Millennium Holdings' contract has a clause that, if misinterpreted, could allow them to back out of the agreement without paying a penalty." James furrowed his brow, taking the document and reviewing it. You're right." Emma smiled, pleased. "Of course I am." James looked up at her, and the intensity in his gaze made Emma feel a little uncomfortable. "You like being right?" "Who doesn't?" James gave a half smile, as if he were enjoying the conversation more than the information itself. Dinner arrived, and Emma sighed when she saw the beautifully arranged dish in front of her. "This looks too good to eat." James calmly cut a piece of his steak. "Are you going to compliment the food before you try it?" "That doesn't seem like your style." Emma rolled her eyes and picked up her fork. "Have you noticed that you love making comments about my style?" James just smiled, as if there was no need to confirm anything. They ate in silence for a few minutes, and Emma was surprised to find that the food was truly amazing. After a long, exhausting day, that dinner felt like an unexpected reward. Once they finished, James leaned back in his chair and watched Emma for a few seconds before speaking. "Do you really think I'm trying to test you?" Emma wiped her lips with the napkin before answering. "I'm sure of it." James tilted his head slightly. "What if I told you, I'm just curious to see how you handle pressure?" Emma crossed her arms. "That's exactly what a test is." James let out a low laugh, and Emma realized that, for the first time, he seemed genuinely relaxed. "You're interesting, Emma Carter." She raised an eyebrow. "Was that a compliment?" "A statement of fact." She sighed. "You need to learn how to compliment people without making it sound like a market analysis." James just smiled. The waiter returned with the bill, and Emma watched as James paid without even blinking. When they left the restaurant, the cold night air made Emma shiver. James took the car keys from the valet and opened the door for her. Emma got in, still processing the night. As James drove, she noticed that, despite the air of superiority he always carried, tonight had shown a different side of him. Something more relaxed, less rigid. When he stopped in front of the building where she lived, Emma hesitated before getting out of the car. "Should I thank you for dinner?" James glanced at her sideways. "If you want to." Emma rolled her eyes. "Great. So, thanks for the absurdly expensive dinner, and for not making me pay half my salary for it." James chuckled softly. "Good night, Emma." She got out of the car and walked into the building, still feeling his gaze on her. When she reached her apartment, she collapsed onto the couch, exhausted. She was right about one thing. Working with James Grayson was a real power game, and somehow, she was starting to enjoy it. Emma woke up feeling the weight of the previous day on her shoulders. The dinner with James Grayson was still echoing in her mind. She turned over in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out why it bothered her so much. There was something in the way he analyzed her, as if he was always trying to predict her next move. It wasn't just a power game, but also some sort of constant test. She got up, went to the bathroom, and splashed cold water on her face. She needed to focus on what really mattered: her work. The dinner had been an unexpected break from her chaotic routine, but now it was time to get back to the pace. She put on a pair of black dress pants and a blue blouse, grabbed her purse, and left the house, determined not to let James's provocations get to her. When she arrived at the office, she noticed that the looks were even more intense than before. People were whispering, exchanging curious glances, and every time Emma passed by, the room would fall silent for a few seconds before the murmur started again. She frowned and walked over to her closest co-worker's desk. "What's going on? It feels like I'm some kind of lab experiment being analyzed." The woman hesitated for a moment, then gave a little smile. "Well, there are rumors." Emma crossed her arms. "What kind of rumors?" The co-worker looked around before leaning in and whispering, "That you and Mr. Grayson had dinner together last night." Emma blinked, surprised. And? And maybe it was something more. Emma let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "Oh my God, seriously? Now I can't even have dinner without people making up rumors." The woman shrugged. "You know how people are. Mr. Grayson never takes anyone to dinner." Emma shook her head, grabbed the papers on her desk, and headed for James's office. This was ridiculous. People had too much time for gossip and not enough time for work. She knocked on the door and heard his deep voice respond. "Come in." Emma opened the door and found James, as usual, immersed in paperwork. He looked up at her, and a slight smirk appeared on his lips. He looked more annoyed than usual. Emma threw the folder of documents on his desk. "Thanks. That's exactly what I needed to hear." James picked up the folder and opened it calmly. "Is something bothering you?" "Yes. The fact that the whole office now thinks that last night's dinner was some kind of romantic date." James raised an eyebrow. "And why does that bother you?" Emma stared at him, incredulous. "Oh, really? Are you enjoying this?" James closed the folder, leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms, a clearly provocative look on his face. "Maybe a little." Emma sighed and sat down in the chair across from him. "I need a favor." James interlaced his fingers, watching her closely. "This is interesting. You usually try to solve everything on your own. And usually I can handle it. But I need you to help me put an end to this gossip." James tilted his head slightly. "And how exactly would I do that?" "I don't know. Maybe spread another rumor, or deny any involvement, or, I don't know. Say there's someone else in your life." James chuckled softly. "Emma, what people say doesn't change anything for me. But it changes things for me." James looked at her for a moment, and then his smile faded a little. "You're worried it'll hurt your credibility." Emma sighed. "Of course. I worked hard to get this job. I don't want people thinking I'm here for any reason other than my skills." James lightly tapped his fingers on the desk, thinking, "All right, let's put an end to this." Emma blinked. "Really?" "Yeah." He picked up the phone and made a quick call. "Karen, please send an internal memo reinforcing that personal relationships at work shouldn't be a subject of speculation, and that any unfounded gossip will be taken seriously. Emma's eyes widened. Wait, you just made this a corporate rule? James hung up the phone and smiled. You wanted to solve the problem, didn't you? Emma let out a nervous laugh. Oh my God, people are going to hate me. James turned his attention back to the documents and casually said, better for them to be intimidated by you than disrespect you. Emma watched him for a moment, trying to figure out if he was really protecting her or just enjoying the situation. Probably both. Before she could keep thinking about it, James stood up and grabbed his jacket. We have a meeting in 30 minutes. I want you there. Emma furrowed her brow. A meeting with who? A potential new investor. And why should I be there? James walked over to her and stopped beside her, leaning slightly down to look her in the eyes. Because I want to see how you handle a tough opponent. Emma felt a shiver run down her spine. Opponent? James smiled. You'll understand. Emma followed him into the meeting room, feeling the rising tension in the air. Something told her this meeting would be much more than just a business negotiation. They entered the room, and Emma immediately recognized the man sitting at the table. Tall, well-dressed, sharp smile, and a calculating gaze. He had the same energy as James, as if he was used to dominating any room. James shook the man's hand firmly. David Lancaster, good to see you again. The man smiled. James Grayson, always a pleasure. Then his eyes turned to Emma. And who's this? James glanced briefly at Emma before answering. My personal assistant. Emma extended her hand to shake his, keeping her posture strong. Emma Carter. David shook her hand, and a smile played on his lips. Carter. I've heard of you. Emma raised an eyebrow. Heard that the halls of Grayson Enterprises talk a lot, and you seem to have made quite an impact. Emma kept her smile, but a hint of irritation stirred inside her. James pulled out a chair to sit down and looked at David with his usual expression of masked boredom. Let's get to the point. The meeting started, and Emma quickly understood what James meant by tough opponent. David was sharp, asking provoking questions and trying to steer the conversation to his own advantage. James, however, remained unfazed. He countered each argument with precision, maintaining control of the situation without showing any signs of stress. Emma watched closely, absorbing every tactic. When David posed a tricky question about the contracts, Emma, without thinking, intervened. In Clause 4.3, there's a detail that protects our interests in the situation. You must have noticed it when reviewing the documents. David looked at her, surprised for a moment, then smiled. Interesting. James gave Emma a satisfied side glance. The meeting continued until David finally stood up and shook James's hand. Always an intriguing game negotiating with you. James smiled. The feeling is mutual. Emma blinked. Really? Yeah. He picked up the phone and made a quick call. Karen, please send an internal memo reinforcing that personal relationships at work shouldn't be a subject of speculation and that any unfounded gossip will be taken seriously. Emma's eyes widened. Wait, you just made this a corporate rule? James hung up the phone and smiled. You wanted to solve the problem, didn't you? Emma let out a nervous laugh. Oh my God, people are going to hate me. James turned his attention back to the documents and casually said, better for them to be intimidated by you than disrespect you. Emma watched him for a moment, trying to figure out if he was really protecting her or just enjoying the situation. Probably both. Before she could keep thinking about it, James stood up and grabbed his jacket. We have a meeting in 30 minutes. I want you there. Emma furrowed her brow. A meeting with who? A potential new investor. And why should I be there? James walked over to her and stopped beside her, leaning slightly down to look her in the eyes. Because I want to see how you handle a tough opponent. Emma felt a shiver run down her spine. Opponent? James smiled. You'll understand. Emma followed him into the meeting room, feeling the rising tension in the air. Something told her this meeting would be much more than just a business negotiation. They entered the room, and Emma immediately recognized the man sitting at the table. Tall, well-dressed, sharp smile, and a calculating gaze. He had the same energy as James, as if he was used to dominating any room. James shook the man's hand firmly. David Lancaster, good to see you again. The man smiled. James Grayson, always a pleasure. Then his eyes turned to Emma. And who's this? James glanced briefly at Emma before answering. My personal assistant. Emma extended her hand to shake his, keeping her posture strong. Emma Carter. David shook her hand, and a smile played on his lips. Carter, I've heard of you. Emma raised an eyebrow. Heard that the halls of Grayson Enterprises talk a lot, and you seem to have made quite an impact. Emma kept her smile, but a hint of irritation stirred inside her. James pulled out a chair to sit down and looked at David with his usual expression of masked boredom. Let's get to the point. The meeting started, and Emma quickly understood what James meant by tough opponent. David was sharp, asking provoking questions and trying to steer the conversation to his own advantage. James, however, remained unfazed. He countered each argument with precision, maintaining control of the situation without showing any signs of stress. Emma watched closely, absorbing every tactic. When David posed a tricky question about the contracts, Emma, without thinking, intervened. In Clause 4.3, there's a detail that protects our interests in the situation. You must have noticed it when reviewing the documents. David looked at her, surprised for a moment, then smiled. Interesting. James gave Emma a satisfied side glance. The meeting continued until David finally stood up and shook James's hand. Always an intriguing game negotiating with you. James smiled. The feeling is mutual. James studied her intensely for a few seconds before standing up and grabbing his jacket. Let's get out of here. Emma blinked, surprised. What? You're right. We've worked enough. It's time for a break. Emma hesitated. Is that an invitation? More like an order, actually. She laughed and grabbed her things. At least you're honest about it. They left the office together, and this time, James didn't take her to an upscale restaurant. He drove to a low-key bar with dim lighting and background music, a place Emma never would have imagined him going. You surprised me, she said, as they settled into a table in the back. James ordered 2 drinks and smiled. How so? I expected something more elitist. You think I only go to fancy restaurants? Until now, that was the impression. James chuckled softly. Surprising people is part of the game, Emma. She picked up her drink and took a sip. You play the game a lot, James. He looked at her, his eyes shining with a mix of amusement and something else harder to read. And you're learning to play too. Emma couldn't tell if that was a compliment or a warning. They stayed at the bar for another hour, talking about business, challenges, and even a few trivial things. Emma noticed that James, away from the corporate environment, was more relaxed, still provocative, still sharp, but different. Let's play a little game for those who only read the comments. Type Pepsi in the comments. Only those who made it this far will understand. Now, let's get back to the story. When they left the bar, the cold night air hit them, and Emma wrapped her arms around herself to protect from the chill. James looked at her for a second, before taking off his jacket and draping it over her shoulders. She looked at him, surprised. That was unexpected. You were shivering. She pulled the jacket tighter around her body and gave a half smile. So, you have a gentleman's side? James just smiled without replying. They walked to the car, and the silence between them was comfortable, but filled with something new. something Emma wasn't quite sure how to name yet. When he stopped in front of her building, Emma hesitated before getting out. She turned to him and tried to ignore the strange feeling in her chest. "It was a good night." James nodded. "Yeah, it was." Emma opened the door, but, before getting out, looked at him one last time. "You're a mystery, James Grayson." He gave a half smile. "And you like solving mysteries." She laughed, got out of the car, and walked into the building. As she went up to her apartment, she felt oddly light. Something was changing. She just didn't know yet where it would take her. The next morning, Emma woke up feeling strangely refreshed despite the twists and turns of the past week, the unexpected dinner, and the night out with James. She didn't feel overwhelmed. On the contrary, she felt a renewed energy. She quickly got ready and left the house, determined to maintain her professional demeanor even with the growing closeness between her and James. After all, she still worked for him, and any involvement outside of work would be problematic for her reputation and her mental well-being. When she arrived at the office, she immediately felt the eyes on her. After James's internal memo about office gossip, the tension among the staff seemed to have increased. Everyone seemed more careful with their whispers, but Emma could still feel the curious stares. She took a deep breath and ignored it, walking straight to her desk. There were emails to answer, meetings to schedule, and a new corporate event in the works. She was determined to focus on work and not on the man who had been complicating her life lately. But of course, James wasn't going to make things easy. "Good morning, Miss Carter." His deep voice sounded from behind her. Emma closed her eyes for a second before turning around. "Good morning, Mr. Grayson." James watched her for a moment before crossing his arms. "Looks like you slept well." Emma narrowed her eyes. "And what does that mean?" James gave a small smile. "Normally, you come in looking like you survived a hurricane. Not today." She scoffed. "Was that a compliment?" "Just an observation." Emma rolled her eyes. "So, what do I owe the honor of this early visit?" James handed her a document. "I need you to review this for the investor meeting tomorrow. There are points I want you to look over and bring suggestions." Emma took the document, flipping through it quickly. "You really like giving me extra work, huh?" James smiled. "I like to see what you're capable of." Emma let out a dramatic sigh. "Of course, because I'm an experiment for you." James didn't deny it. 8 o'clock in my office. I want to hear your thoughts." Emma shook her head, grabbed a coffee, and got to work. The day went by fast, and before she knew it, it was almost time for the meeting with James. She reviewed the documents one more time before grabbing her notes and heading to his office. She knocked on the door and walked in. James was standing, his back to her, looking out at the city through the large glass window. "You know, you could have a worse view," Emma commented, closing the door. James turned around and smiled. "It's one of the perks of the job." Emma sat down and placed the documents on the desk. "I've gone over everything. There are 3 clauses that need adjusting. Here are my suggestions." James took the papers and looked them over, occasionally glancing at her as if he were processing something beyond the written words. "Good work." Emma raised an eyebrow. "What?" "You heard me." Emma laughed. "James Grayson complimenting me? I need to mark this date." He just gave a half smile before resting his elbows on the desk and interlacing his fingers. "Now that we've dealt with the boring stuff, I have another—" Emma frowned. "Another impossible task?" "Not exactly." James paused for a moment before continuing. "There's a gala in 2 days. I want you to come with me." Emma blinked, surprised. "What?" "The event is a strategic business opportunity, but I need someone by my side who understands the ongoing negotiations." "So, you want me to go as your assistant?" James gave a slight smile. "And as my +1." Emma froze for a few seconds. "Is this a problem for you?" James asked with his usual teasing tone. She opened her mouth to respond, but then closed it. She knew she couldn't refuse without a solid reason. He had given a professional justification, so any refusal would seem personal. "Fine," she finally said, "but I get to choose my dress." James chuckled quietly. "As long as you look presentable, I have no problem with that." Emma rolled her eyes. "Does that mean I can go in sweatpants?" "Not even in your worst nightmares." Emma laughed and grabbed the documents before leaving the room. In the following 2 days, she focused on work, trying not to think too much about the event. But she couldn't ignore the looks from the employees every time James passed by, saying something casually, as if they weren't about to attend one of the company's biggest events together. On the night of the event, Emma looked at herself in the mirror, feeling oddly nervous. She had chosen a long black dress, elegant but not overly flashy. Her hair was tied low, and she wore light makeup. She sighed before grabbing her purse and heading downstairs to meet James, who had insisted on picking her up. When she stepped out of the building, she saw James leaning against his car, wearing a perfectly tailored tuxedo. He looked at her for a moment before saying, "Impressive." Emma raised an eyebrow. "Is that a compliment?" James smiled. "Yes, it is." She blinked, surprised, but got into the car without saying anything. The drive to the event was silent, but comfortable. When they arrived, Emma realized just how grand the event was. A luxurious ballroom, guests dressed extravagantly, cameras capturing every detail. James stepped out of the car first and offered his hand to Emma, who hesitated slightly before accepting. As she stepped out, she noticed people staring at them. "This is a bad idea," she whispered. James smiled. "It's too late to back out now." Emma squared her shoulders and walked with him into the ballroom. The night was just beginning, but she had a feeling this event would change everything. What do you think about this turning point in Emma and James's relationship? Like and let us know your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your feedback. Emma took a deep breath as she stepped through the vast ballroom beside James. The air exuded opulence, with massive chandeliers hanging from the ceiling and intricately decorated tables scattered throughout the space. The murmurs of the guests mingled with the soft sound of live music. She could feel every eye on her, and for the first time, she realized that being with James wasn't just about working for him. He led her through with ease, as if they were used to attending events together. Still, Emma was aware of the weight of this moment. The office rumors were already harsh enough, and now, appearing publicly with James would only fuel more curiosity. "Relax," James whispered, leaning slightly toward her. "You're so tense you look like you're about to bolt." Emma gave a small smile, not taking her eyes off the crowd around them. "It's not every day I'm the center of attention without meaning to be." James gently took her arm and guided her toward a group of business people. "Focus on what you do best." She raised an eyebrow. "Work?" James grinned. "Challenge me." Emma didn't have time to respond. They were already standing in front of a small group of important people. James greeted them with ease, and Emma watched closely as he became the center of the conversation. He spoke confidently, controlling each exchange like he was playing an invisible chess game and anticipating every move. Before long, she realized he was challenging her again. Whenever someone brought up a strategic point about the company, James glanced at her, waiting for her to jump in. At first, she hesitated, but she quickly understood what he wanted, for her to prove her worth. So, she joined in. "The market's been unstable lately," one businessman remarked. "True," Emma agreed, taking a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. "But instability also opens doors for innovation. Companies that navigate tough times are the ones that come out stronger." The businessman looked at her, surprised. "That's a bold take." James just smirked, pleased. "That's why she's with me." Emma felt a chill run down her spine at those words. The way he said it in front of everyone sounded more personal than it needed to. But she brushed it off, and focused on the conversation. The night went on with more exchanges, negotiations, and, of course, more speculation about her presence there. Emma was used to being the subject of rumors, but she knew this time was different. At one point, James stepped away to talk to an investor, and Emma took the chance to slip out to the balcony for some fresh air. The cool night breeze was a welcome relief. "Hiding?" A familiar voice called from behind. Emma turned and saw David Lancaster leaning against the wall, holding a glass of whiskey. "Just getting some air," she replied, crossing her arms. David studied her for a moment before smiling. "You did well tonight." "I always do." He chuckled softly. "I like your confidence." Emma narrowed her eyes. "You didn't come out here just to compliment me, did you?" David took a sip of his whiskey before answering. "Just curious. You and James are pretty close." Emma narrowed her eyes. "What are you getting at?" David took another sip of his whiskey, his smile sharpening. "Just an observation. You two make an interesting pair." Emma straightened up, keeping her tone cool. "We work together. That's it." David raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced, but didn't push further. "If you say so. See you around, Carter." He tipped his glass slightly and walked back inside, leaving Emma alone with her thoughts. She leaned against the balcony railing, staring out at the city lights. The night had been a whirlwind. Business deals, subtle power plays, and now this. She wasn't sure what bothered her more, David's insinuation, or the fact that she couldn't entirely dismiss it. James had a way of pulling her into his orbit, and she wasn't sure how much of it was strategy or something else. Before she could dwell on it too long, she heard footsteps behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. "Taking a break already?" James's voice carried that familiar, teasing edge. Emma glanced over her shoulder. "Just needed a minute to breathe. You should try it sometime." He stepped up beside her, hands in his pockets, gazing out at the skyline. "I breathe fine," Emma snorted. "Sure, if you count plotting your next move as breathing." James chuckled, a low sound that made her stomach flip despite herself. They stood there in silence for a moment, the hum of the gala fading into the background. "You did well tonight," he said finally, breaking the quiet. Emma turned to him, surprised. "Was that a compliment?" James smirked. "Don't let it go to your head." She rolled her eyes, but couldn't hide a small smile. "Wouldn't dream of it." He tilted his head, studying her. "You're not intimidated by these people." It wasn't a question, but Emma answered anyway. "Why should I be? They're just people with fancier suits." James's smirk widened. "That's why I brought you." Emma crossed her arms, trying to ignore the flutter in her chest. "To show me off? Or to test me again?" He didn't answer right away, just kept looking at her with that unreadable intensity. "Maybe both." She sighed, turning back to the view. "You're impossible, you know that." "I've been told." They lapsed into silence again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. If anything, it felt charged, like the air before a storm. What do you think of this tension between Emma and James? Smash that like button and let us know your predictions in the comments. We're all ears. Emma eventually broke the silence. "David Lancaster was out here a minute ago. He thinks we're more than co-workers." James raised an eyebrow. "Does he?" "Yeah, and I'm guessing half the room does too." James didn't seem fazed. "Let them think what they want." Emma turned to him, exasperated. "Easy for you to say. You're the untouchable CEO. I'm the one who has to deal with the whispers." He met her gaze, his expression softening slightly. "You're tougher than that." She wanted to argue, but something in his tone stopped her. Instead, she sighed. "Maybe. But it's still annoying." James stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Then prove them wrong. Keep doing what you do best." Emma blinked, caught off guard by the sincerity behind his words. Before she could respond, he nodded toward the ballroom. "Come on, night's not over yet." She followed him back inside, her mind racing. He was right. She'd deal with the rumors her way. But that didn't make this any less complicated. The rest of the gala passed in a blur of handshakes and small talk. Emma stayed by James's side, matching his pace as they navigated the room. By the time they left, her feet ached, and her head buzzed with exhaustion and champagne. In the car, she leaned back against the seat, closing her eyes. "Survived another one of your tests," she muttered. James glanced at her, amused. "You're keeping score? Someone has to." He chuckled, but didn't argue. When they reached her building, Emma hesitated before getting out. "Thanks for tonight." Even if it was half business, half torture. James smirked. "You're welcome." She stepped out, but before closing the door, she looked back at him. "You're still a mystery, Grayson." He gave her that half smile she was starting to recognize. "Good." She shook her head, shut the door, and headed inside, feeling his eyes on her, until she disappeared into the lobby. The next few weeks flew by in a haze of work. Emma threw herself into her role, handling contracts, meetings, and James's relentless challenges. Their dynamic shifted subtly, less guarded, more familiar. He still provoked her, but there was a warmth behind it now. She caught herself looking forward to their banter, even if she'd never admit it. The office gossip had quieted after James's memo, but the looks lingered. Emma ignored them. She had bigger things to focus on, like keeping up with her boss. One evening, after a particularly long day, James called her into his office. "You're still here," she said, dropping into the chair across from him. "So are you." He slid a folder toward her. "Last task of the day." Emma groaned. "Seriously?" "It's light. Just a review." She took the folder, flipping it open. "You're trying to kill me." James leaned back, watching her with that familiar glint. "You're too stubborn to die." She smirked, scanning the pages. "Found a typo already. Your team's slipping." He raised an eyebrow. "Or you're just that good." Emma paused, meeting his gaze. "Was that a compliment?" "Don't push it." She laughed, and for a moment, the room felt lighter. They worked in companionable silence, the city lights glowing beyond the window. When they finished, Emma stretched and stood. "I'm calling it. See you tomorrow." James nodded. "Night, Carter." She left, but the warmth of that moment stayed with her. How's this partnership evolving? Hit like and share your thoughts in the comments. Do you see sparks or just strategy? Weeks turned into months, and Emma found her rhythm. She and James became a seamless team, her quick thinking complementing his calculated precision. They challenged each other constantly, but it was productive, almost electric. Outside the office, their interactions grew less formal. A coffee run here, a late-night drink there. Emma told herself it was just work bleeding into life, but deep down, she knew better. One night, after a grueling week, James suggested drinks at that same low-key bar. Emma agreed, too tired to overthink it. They settled into their usual spot, the dim lighting casting soft shadows. "You've been quiet today," James noted, sipping his drink. Emma shrugged. "Just fried. You?" "Same." She raised her glass. "To surviving?" He clinked his against hers. "To thriving." They talked about nothing important. Movies, bad coffee, the intern who spilled ink all over the printer. It was easy, unguarded. Emma caught herself laughing more than usual, and James's rare, genuine smiles didn't go unnoticed. When they stepped outside, the night air was crisp. James draped his jacket over her shoulders again, and this time, she didn't protest. "You're making a habit of this," she teased. "You're making a habit of shivering," he shot back. They walked to his car, and when he dropped her off, Emma lingered. "This was nice." James nodded. "Yeah, it was." She got out, but before closing the door, she smirked. "Don't get too comfortable being human, Grayson." He laughed, a real, unguarded sound, Wouldn't dream of it. She watched him drive off, her heart doing something she refused to name. The shift was undeniable now. Work was still their anchor, but something else simmered beneath it. Emma tried to keep her guard up, but James had a way of slipping past it. One Friday, he called her into his office. "Gala tomorrow night," he said, handing her an invite. "Same drill?" she asked. "Not quite. This one's personal." Emma frowned. "Personal how?" James met her eyes. "I want you there as my date." Her breath caught. "Date?" "Yeah." She searched his face for a trick, but found none. "Why?" James stepped closer, his voice low. "Because I want you there, Emma. Not as my assistant. As you." Her heart raced. She could say no, keep it professional, but the truth was, she didn't want to. "Okay," she said finally, "but I'm still picking my dress." He smiled. "Deal." The gala was dazzling. Lights, music, power players everywhere. Emma wore a deep blue gown, elegant but bold. And when James saw her, he froze for a split second. "You clean up nice," she teased. "So do you," he replied, his gaze lingering. They moved through the night together, not as boss and assistant, but as equals. People noticed, whispered, but Emma didn't care. For once, she let herself enjoy it. Later, on the balcony, James pulled her close. "Your trouble, Carter." She grinned. "You started it." He laughed, then kissed her. Soft at first, then deeper, like he'd been holding back for months. When they pulled apart, Emma's head spun. "This complicates things," she murmured. "Probably," he agreed, brushing his thumb across her cheek. "Worth it?" She smiled. "Yeah." "What's your take on this kiss? Like this post, and drop your reaction in the comments. Did you see it coming?" Time flew after that night. Emma and James didn't hide their shift, though they kept it subtle at work. They were partners now, in business and beyond. He was still the sharp, demanding CEO, but with her, there was a softness no one else saw. She challenged him daily, and he thrived on it. Coffee runs became routine, his jacket over her shoulders a given. One evening, a year after that first gala, James took her somewhere unexpected. "Helipad?" Emma frowned as they stepped out of the elevator atop Grayson Enterprises. "What's this about?" James just smiled, leading her to a path of rose petals under soft lights. Her heart skipped. At the center, he turned to her, pulling out a velvet box. "Emma, you've turned my world upside down since day one. I don't want anyone else challenging me like you do." He opened the box. A diamond ring gleamed inside. "Will you marry me?" Emma's hands flew to her mouth, tears prickling her eyes. "Yes," she whispered, then laughed. "Yes, you idiot." He slid the ring on her finger and kissed her hard, the city lights twinkling like they were celebrating too. "Love you, Grayson," she murmured against his lips. "Love you too, Carter," he replied, holding her tight. 3 months later, their wedding was grand, yet personal. White flowers, soft lights, and a mix of power players and loved ones. Emma walked down the aisle in a stunning gown, her eyes locked on James. He took her hand, whispering, "You're beautiful." "I know," she winked. Their vows were raw and real, promises to challenge, support, and love. When they kissed as husband and wife, the crowd cheered. But for them, it was just the two of them. How's this love story hitting you? Like this, and tell us in the comments if you'd crash their wedding. We want details. Emma and James's journey in this story is a roller coaster of grit, growth, and unexpected connection that hits home for anyone who's ever stumbled into something bigger than themselves. Emma starts as a rookie executive assistant, thrown into chaos on her first day, mistaking the CEO for an IT guy. What a classic American underdog move. Her boldness, even when she's clueless, is relatable. We've all been there, faking it till we make it, hoping no one calls us out. But what stands out is how she doesn't just survive James's relentless tests. She thrives. That's the American spirit right there. Turning pressure into opportunity, proving yourself when the stakes are high. James, on the other hand, is the quintessential power player. Sharp, confident, a little cocky, but he's not untouchable. His slow shift from detached boss to someone who genuinely values Emma shows how even the toughest exteriors can crack when met with real tenacity and heart. The life lesson here is about embracing challenges head-on and letting relationships evolve naturally. Emma didn't back down when she could have. She leaned into the mess, owned her mistakes, and built something out of it. In our own lives, we can apply that by not shying away from tough situations at work or in personal goals. Whether it's a new job, a difficult conversation, or an unexpected curveball, the story reminds us to push forward with confidence, even if we're winging it. And James, he teaches us that letting people in, colleagues, friends, or even a partner, doesn't weaken you. It sharpens you. Their dynamic proves that growth often comes from tension, and sometimes the people who challenge us most are the ones who help us become our best selves. For me, this hits personally. I've had moments where I felt out of my depth, starting a new project, meeting high expectations, and wanted to run. But like Emma, I've learned that standing your ground, even when you're terrified, builds not just skills, but character. And like James, I've seen how opening up to someone's strengths can turn a solo game into a winning team effort. In everyday life, we can channel Emma's hustle by tackling that daunting task we've been avoiding. Maybe it's asking for a raise or learning something new. And we can take a page from James by recognizing the value in those around us, giving them a chance to shine. Their love story, built on mutual respect and earned trust, is a bonus reminder that the best relationships, romantic or not, grow from shared struggles and victories. This tale isn't just entertainment. It's a blueprint. It says, don't fear the chaos, embrace it. Challenge yourself, challenge others, and watch what happens. We're all a little like Emma and James, figuring it out as we go, finding strength in the grind, and maybe even love along the way. Hey, if Emma and James's wild ride got you hooked, smash that like button and share this video with your crew. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a story. Drop your favorite moment or life lesson in the comments. We're reading every one. See you in the next one.